say that he does have ties to Muslim extremists. I don't know.
For decades, US dollars have been dominating global trade. And for years, the United States has been flexing its financial muscle through its dollars. The country's unilateral sanctions, for example, could never be imaginable without the unique position the greenback has held in international trade since World War II. Yet this dominance by no means is to be permanent. In fact, there are many factors now at play challenging the almighty dollar. During World War II, the US served as the Allies' main provider of weapons, supplies and other goods. Collecting much of its payment in gold by the end of the war, the US owned the vast majority of the world's gold. So after the war, countries linked their currencies to the dollar, which was linked to gold, and instead of gold reserves, they accumulated reserves of US dollars. Needing a place to store their dollars, they began buying US Treasury securities, considered to be a safe store of money. The demand for Treasury securities, coupled with the need to finance the Vietnam War and the Great Society domestic programs launched by President Lyndon B. Johnson, caused the US to flood the market with paper money. With growing concerns over the stability of the dollar, countries began to convert dollar reserves into gold. The demand for gold was such that President Richard Nixon was forced to intervene and de-link the dollar from gold, which led to the floating exchange rates that exist today. Although the US dollar has remained the world's reserve currency for decades, issues such as large deficit spending, trillions of dollars in debt, and the unbridled printing of US dollars are shaking its status. In early Stanley Druckenmiller sounded a warning that the dollar could cease to be the prominent global reserve currency within 15 years. His warning comes against the backdrop of a long-standing retreat from the dollar as the world has moved gradually towards a multiple reserve currency system. The IMF's latest survey shows that shares of US dollar reserves held by central banks fell to 59% during the fourth quarter of 2020, its lowest level in 25 years. The US accounted for the majority of the industrial production of the non-Soviet world after the Second World War, so it made sense that the dollar was the principal unit in which exporters and importers invoiced and settled, in which international loans were extended and in which central banks held their reserves. But today, with the US accounting for less than a quarter of global gross domestic product, it makes less sense. The latest IMF numbers indicate countries that trade with and borrow from the euro area increasingly seek to hold euro reserves. That process is now happening with China and the renminbi. Inside the United States, there are mounting fears that the Federal Reserve's mismanagement, coupled with Joe Biden's careless fiscal policy and inflation, could undermine the dollar. Former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers has recently said, "The Biden administration is pursuing the least responsible fiscal macroeconomic we've had for the last 40 years, adding, "We're seeing an episode that I think differs both quantitatively and qualitatively from anything since Paul Volcker's days at the Fed. And it stands to reason that that would lead to significant changes in expectations." In other words, the anti-inflationary credibility won by the Fed over the past 40 years may now be in question, causing foreign investors to worry that the US will inflate away the value of their Treasury holdings. Against such a backdrop, the world is looking for other viable alternatives. For example, the European Union is trying to create a recovery fund financed by commonly used EU debt. Although the move is yet suggests that the euro, currently making up to 20% of global reserves, could play an increasing role. In the case of the renminbi, Beijing is committed to challenging the dollar and has actively encouraged the use of the renminbi in bilateral trade transactions. The Belt and Road Initiative provides new financing opportunities for the digital renminbi, currently under development. And Beijing has the advantage that China has recovered more strongly than the other big economies from the COVID-19 setback. Foreign capital has been flooding in too, as China has progressively opened up its financial markets.
我们一直跟我们合作的支付机构、持牌的支付机构和银行一起合作，去对接这个数字人民币的一些标准。试点和将来要正式推广的区域里面，我们把我们的商户受理数字人民币的能力给加上，这是我们一直在做的准备。就目前为止，在试点范围内只有几家银行和几家支付机构可以服务。我们跟他们合作，一起来给我们的商户提供这样的技术服务。
The wild card here relates to digital currencies. Geeta Gopinath, IMF chief economist, believes that technology has plenty to offer in providing cheaper and faster cross-border payments and improving financial inclusion.
Many institutional investors are trying to expose to the cryptocurrency. They are holding Bitcoin as an alternative asset to hedge the risk of global financial. And also some retail investors, they just discovered new ways to hold crypto assets because PayPal just opened their cryptocurrency business services to their retail users in US market. So from the demand side, there was a huge surge.
Finally, what might undermine the dominance of the US dollar is the weaponization of the dollar, or the US government's exploitation of the currency's global dominance to extend the extraterritorial reach of US law and policy. The most outstanding example is the Trump administration's enforcement of economic sanctions against Iran in an attempt to shut the country out of the international banking system, and in particular, SWIFT.
I think that American dollar together with the international payment system known as the SWIFT system. Therefore, any company in the world, if it is doing business using US dollars, actually, it is under the supervision of the American authority.
Faced almost with the same sanctions, Russia shifted its reserves out of the dollars in 2018 and is selling its oil in non-dollar currencies.
То есть возможности расчетов и в национальных валютах. Мы со многими странами это делаем сейчас, нашими партнерами. Готовы говорить о расчетах в евро. И вот евро для нас абсолютно приемлем в расчетах по газу. Это можно делать, конечно. И...
Kendimize inanıyoruz. Güveniyoruz. Şu anda biz Rusya'yla alışverişlerde ruble, Türk lirası. Bunu konuşuyor. Aynı şekilde İran'la, aynı şekilde Çin'le yerli ve milli parayla alışveriş yapmanın dönemlerini başlatıyor. Hiçbir ekonomik temeli olmayan.
Likewise, Europe or China may succeed in developing alternative payment mechanisms that would allow countries such as Iran to sell its oil. That might in turn undermine the dollar's role in the long run.
It's just the very fact that the Americans do use their extraterritorial power over the dollar in lots and lots of different ways does make other countries now more likely to look at to hold their reserves. It also pushes countries into gold, for example. We've seen that with the Russians.
If the pace of financial sanctions continues to grow over the next decade, it might increase the attractiveness of cross-border payment systems based on the euro, renminbi, or other alternatives. With the dollar facing all these challenges, Washington is expected to have a hard time maintaining its current hegemony in the years to come.